Picture this. It's just after 5 o'clock on a warm spring evening in New Orleans. The air is thick, the streets are alive with people, and right here, we're about to see the end of an era, the final act in the war on the Depression-era gangster. On this very street, the last of the so-called public enemies is about to walk straight into a perfectly designed trap.
We're on Canal Street. There's a Plymouth coupe parked right at the curb. Inside, Alvin, creepy Karpis, and his associate are just getting settled. They have absolutely no idea that they're the main event in a massive federal operation. All around them, unseen, FBI cars are quietly moving into place. Agents are ready. The trap is about to spring shut.
And the story that's going to come out of this? Well, it's pure cinematic heroism. The director of the FBI himself, J. Edgar Hoover, right there on the scene, rushing the car and single-handedly stopping the nation's most wanted man from starting a bloody firefight. It's a powerful image for sure, one that's going to help build a legend.
And that, right there, is the big question we're digging into. Because behind that official story, there's another version, one told by Karpis himself, and another pieced together from the Bureau's own files. So what was the real story behind the manhunt, the trap, and that final dramatic arrest?
To find out, we have to go back. First, we'll look at how Alvin Karpis even became the last public enemy standing. Then we're going to trace the massive nationwide manhunt that shrunk his world down to just one city block. After that, we'll break down the anatomy of the New Orleans trap itself. And finally, we'll put the official case file up against the legend and see what shakes out.
So, who was this Alvin Karpis guy? Well, he wasn't just another stick-up artist. He was widely seen as the brains behind one of the most dangerous criminal gangs of the 1930s. His cunning, his ability to survive when so many others were going down in a hail of bullets, it made his capture the absolute top priority for a young FBI that was desperate to prove itself. The Barker-Karpis gang, man, they were a force of nature. Led by Karpis and Fred Barker, these guys were ruthless, they were efficient. And yeah, bank robberies were their bread and butter, but they took it to a whole other level with a crime that absolutely terrified the wealthy and got the attention of the White House: kidnapping for ransom.
In 1933, they grabbed William Ham, a Minnesota brewer, for a cool $100,000 ransom. Then, just a year later, they upped the ante. They kidnapped St. Paul banker Edward Bremer for $200,000. Now, here's the kicker. Bremer's father was a friend of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, and that connection brought the full, crushing weight of the federal government down on the gang. The hunt was officially on.
You have to understand, the mid-1930s were a bloodbath for the gangster class. The FBI was just systematically taking these guys apart. Dillinger, gone. Pretty Boy Floyd, gone. Babyface Nelson, gone. Then, in a huge shootout at a cottage on Lake Weir, Florida, agents killed Fred and Ma Barker. And just like that, the quiet planner of the gang, Alvin Karpis, was the last major figure standing. He was now public enemy number one.
So, with all the other big names dead, the Bureau's focus became laser-sharp. Find Alvin Karpis. And this wasn't just going to be a simple chase. Oh no, this was a systematic, coast-to-coast effort to shrink his world, piece by piece, until he had nowhere left to hide. It was a showcase of the Bureau's growing power.
To catch a guy like Karpis, the FBI brought out the whole toolkit, really marking a shift to modern scientific policing. They were developing these new techniques, like using silver nitrate to pull fingerprints off ransom notes. They meticulously tracked the serial numbers on every ransom bill. They set up nationwide watch lists. They squeezed informants. It was just this slow, grinding process of closing every door, every escape route, one by one.
And all this methodical work, it really started to pay off. For instance, after agents cornered and killed a gang member named Russell Gibson in Chicago, they tossed his apartment. And hidden among the guns and ammo, they find a map of Florida. And circled on that map, Lake Weir, the exact spot where they'd find Ma and Fred Barker just a few days later. Every capture, every raid, it gave them another piece of the puzzle, slowly but surely shrinking the map of where Karpis could possibly be.
Karpis was a ghost, always on the move, but the net was tightening. Through round-the-clock surveillance of his known associates, leads started to point south, towards the Big Easy. Agents on the ground zeroed in on an apartment building on Canal Street, and a specific Plymouth coupe being used by a man calling himself Mr. O'Hara, a quiet guy who spent his days fishing, but was, in fact, the most wanted fugitive in America.
All right, so once they had their target locked in, the whole game changed. It wasn't about mapping him anymore. It was about trapping him. The goal wasn't just an arrest, it was a perfectly engineered takedown. It was designed to be foolproof and to send a message to the whole country that the era of the gangster was officially over. And this wasn't some spur-of-the-moment raid. No, this was a tactical maneuver, literally sketched out on a blackboard. And the plan was critical. They had to wait for Karpis to get into his car. See, on foot, he could just vanish into a crowd. But a car can be contained. Agents were given specific positions. Cars were staged and ready to block every single escape route the second the signal was given. The trap was officially set.
The call goes out. Karpis and Fred Hunter, they leave the apartment building. They walk to the Plymouth. They get in. As the engine starts to turn over, Hoover gives the signal. And in an instant, FBI cars lurch forward, boxing the coupe in perfectly. Seconds later, the car is swarmed by agents, guns drawn. There is nowhere to go. And guess who was right there on the scene? J. Edgar Hoover himself. And this was not an accident. Just a month before, he'd been absolutely grilled by a senator named Kenneth McKellar in a hearing who basically called him out for never having personally made an arrest. Hoover, who was a master of PR, vowed he'd be there for the next big one. So for him, catching Karpis wasn't just about closing a case, it was about cementing his own legend and the image of his bureau. So the trap springs. It works perfectly. Karpis is caught without a single shot fired. But the precise details of what happened in those few moments during the arrest, well, that became the subject of a debate that lasted for decades. And this is where we get to compare the official legend, shaped largely by Hoover, with the other accounts we can find in the case files and Karpis's own memoirs.
Okay, so you've got two very different stories. The official version casts Hoover as the action hero, lunging at the car. But Karpis, years later, he painted a completely different picture. He claimed Hoover hung back until it was totally safe, then came forward to take all the credit. And he made this one very specific and seemingly damning claim. The car, a Plymouth coupe, didn't even have a back seat for him to reach into.
So who was telling the truth? Let's break down the details. First, the rifle. Karpis was being clever here. He was technically right. There was no full back seat. But the FBI's own report confirms the rifle was found on a back shelf right behind the driver's seat, totally within reach. As for Hoover's position, that same report notes that Hoover's car got blocked for a second by a policeman on a horse, which means other agents almost certainly got to Karpis first. And on one bizarre detail, everybody agrees. In all that careful planning, not a single one of the dozens of agents on scene remembered to bring handcuffs. So with no handcuffs, the agents had to improvise. A special agent named W.L. Buck Buchanan literally took off his own necktie and used it to tie the hands of Public Enemy No. 1. And years later, you can find this lighthearted letter from Buchanan to Hoover joking about a tie party. It's this fascinating, human little glimpse into the official record, and it confirms one of the strangest details of the whole affair. So where does that leave us? The truth, it seems, is somewhere in the middle. Was Hoover hiding in the background like Karpis claimed? The case file says no. He was definitely there on the scene. But did he single-handedly wrestle Karpis into submission? The Bureau's own records suggest that part was polished up a bit. Hoover was there, no doubt, but the story was carefully crafted for public consumption. The capture of Alvin Karpis wasn't just the end of the Public Enemy era. It was a masterclass in how a real, successful operation can be forged into a powerful, lasting legend, one that would define the FBI for generations to come.